Bardwell, we're following along with your build. Why did you do a build with SharkByte if it was not going to be well suited for this frame? Because I don't plan my builds around what is going to be feasible. I just go, oh yeah, let's put SharkByte in there, and then charge ahead. And then I find out halfway through that it's not ideal. And then I just, you know, sunk cost fallacy. You guys love it when I screw things up halfway through, don't you? A little while back, I made a video trying to figure out what is the most fun freestyle quad under 250 grams. And I thought I knew what the answer was going to be. And then I was absolutely blown away by this, the Ummagawd 2Fiddy. And that is why today I'm going to build my own 2Fiddy. If you want to get in on the sub 250 gram 5-inch amazement that it is, this is the video for you. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. Well, every time I do a build video, people want to see the quad flying. So I'm going to put some flight footage. This is the exact quad that I build in this video right here at the beginning. Not going to make you wait to the end to watch it. Frankly, you shouldn't decide whether you want to build or not build this quad based on this one video. I mean, but I get it. You want to see what it flies like, and so here it is. The camera that I'm using to capture this footage is the Caddx Peanut. The Caddx Peanut is a slightly modified version of the Insta360 Go 2, modified for FPV, but it is an Insta360 Go 2 at its heart, and that means it does have stabilization. Hang on, because we're about to do some flippy flops, and I feel like little flippy flops like this just get ruined by stabilization. They take all the sharpness out. In fact, let's just leave the stabilization off for the whole rest of this flight, so you can really get a sense of how the quad flies. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If this is something you're interested in building, this is a full tutorial for how to build it. It's a long video because it's a full, I didn't split it into separate segments and make you search around for them this time. There are chapter markers in the video description. There's a table of contents with timestamps, and in the timeline, in the timeline down below the video, there are chapter markers as well. So just skip to wherever you need to get as you watch through the video and enjoy the flight. One more thing, some builds that I do, I am confident holding them out as a tutorial that you will have a great experience with them. This is not one of those. There were many aspects of this build that did not go like I originally intended them to. At the end, I'm very happy with the quad that I've got, but I definitely think you should watch through this video and see some of the trouble I ran into before you decide to build the exact quad I'm building. Because remember, I'm choosing different parts than Tommy did, and it does bite me. Here are the parts that are going to go into this build. There are links to all these parts down in the video description below if you want to pick them up for yourself. And we're going to start with the Ummagawd 2Fiddy frame. Obviously, it's the heart of the build. The motors are going to be the Aerolite 2004 motors, and these are the motors that Tommy designed for this build. Now, one thing that is unique about the Aerolite 2004 motor is that it has a smaller motor base, sized for 2 screws, and that is the same as the 2Fiddy frame. If you decide to go with a different 2004 motor, and there are a lot of good 2004 motors out there today, they will be a little bit heavier and they won't have that specialized base. As far as the flight controller and ESC go, we are going to be going with the iFlight Beast F7. This is an all-in-one flight controller and ESC with a 45 amp ESC and an F7 flight controller. There is a Beast H7 out there, which is a slightly higher performance flight controller processor and a slightly higher rated ESC, but I don't actually recommend you get it. It's more expensive. The extra performance we don't really need, and until Betaflight 4.3 comes out, there are some things that don't, like bidirectional Dshot and the barometer don't work right on the Beast H7. So I would steer you toward the Beast F7. Frankly, these days, these all-in-one flight controllers are getting more and more expensive due to the component shortages. If you're going to follow this build, we're going to be sticking with what Tommy recommends, which is the Beast F7. But if you're trying to do this on a budget, you might go with one of the more budget-priced flight controllers. you just won't be able to follow along with this build. I will put some links down in the video description to other ones you might consider that come in at a slightly lower price point. And that leaves only the video transmitter, and we're going to do something really different here because Tommy flies this with the Caddx Vista with the DJI system, but I'm going to be putting SharkByte's new racing video transmitter in there, because if the goal is to get it under 250 grams, then if we can save a little bit of weight by putting the SharkByte in here, maybe we could come back around and try maybe some bigger motors or have a little bit of weight to spare for something else. So we're going to try it with SharkByte. So I guess in this case, we're not going to do what Tommy recommends. Now, the original camera that came with the SharkByte system, the Runcam Nano, was pretty bad. It was, and it still is. Thanks, Mitch Hedberg, for the joke. We're going to be going with the Foxeer Digisight. And to tell you the truth, I haven't tried the Foxeer Digisight either, but it's got to be better, right? We'll see. So we're going to start this build with this bottom plate here and the four arms. And the four arms fit together in the center. And one of the things Tommy says to be careful about is that the arms fit together, and you should see that they have a short side and a long side. And the long sides go sideways and the short sides go front to back. So they're going to go together like that, with the short sides of the arms up and down and the long sides fitting together sideways. Next, we're going to get the 10mm screws from the hardware kit, and those are going to be the longest screws in the hardware kit. And it is going to go through this outer hole here. Then the arm is going to go on top. Well, unfortunately, it seems like this needs to be drilled out slightly. It's not uncommon for manufacturers to deliver frames with a little bit tight tolerances, but on the screw holes, I mean, I guess you don't want the arms to be loose, but it's so tight that I feel like it's just going to twist the screw off. Especially if these are aluminum screws, it's just going to twist the screw head off. And you're not going to be able to tighten down the standoff either. So I really think these need to be drilled out somewhat. Next, we're going to take an M3 by 8mm screw, which is the second biggest size in the kit, and put it through. And then we're going to take this X plate and we're going to put it on top. And again, this should slide right over this screw, and then the 8mm screw should screw into the press nut. Make sure you do it right side up. It goes with the press nuts facing up. But again, because these screw holes seem to be slightly undersized, it will not slide down. It's going to just cinch down, I guess. I'm going to assume that yours will be drilled correctly and will not have this issue. And here we have the first arm installed, and I'm going to do the other four the exact same way. Here's what it looks like with the arms installed, and now we come to the standoffs. And Ummagawd ships these with two different sets of standoffs. One, tall standoffs if you need like a double high 20mm stack or something like that, and one short standoffs, which is how he builds it out. If you're going to build it with the short standoffs, you will use all of the short standoffs and one long standoff for the rear. If you're going to build it with the long standoffs for a taller build, you will actually flip it over so the arms are on the underside, and you'll need to insert these 10mm screws the other way around so they come up, and then it'll give you all of this room on the inside. For the short standoff version, the arms go on the inside and it's a little bit more compact. We're going to do it with the short standoff version. Next, we're going to mount the flight controller, and we're going to do that using these M2 standoffs and these M2 screws, which come with the 2Fiddy kit. And if you look closely at the frame, I want you to identify these M2 screw holes here, 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 and here. These are the four screw holes you're going to use, and the flight controller will mount on those screw holes in a sort of a diagonal orientation. So the M2 screw will go up through the screw hole in the bottom plate, and the standoff will screw down on it. And we're going to use a 1.5mm driver. And now we've got all four of those M2 screws installed. We can prep the flight controller. To prep the flight controller, we're going to get these silicone, they're called gummies. And I want you to notice that the gummy has one long side and one short side. The long side is going to go down, and this is the top of the flight controller here. The top has the USB and this plug on it. So the top side up, and this is going to go long side down. And what we have to do is we have to just kind of wiggle those through the mounting holes on the flight controller, which is, to be honest, kind of a pain in the butt. But you figure it out. And then we're going to install it in the frame. And like with any flight controller, there is a front-facing direction that it is designed to face the front of the quad. You can see just here is the front-facing arrow indicator. But as Tommy points out in his build video, the problem is that that will cause this USB plug to be blocked by the standoff, and he recommends rotating it 45 degrees so you can get at the plug, and then in Betaflight we can compensate for that rotation later on. There we go. And then I am gonna put on just like one or two of these little screw nuts to hold this on, but hopefully not get in the way of us soldering everything up. And you want those tight enough that they compress the gummy just a little bit, so the friction of the silicone gummy holds it from it backing off, but not so tight that they squish the gummy and negate the vibration isolating effect. Another thing you have to check is that there is sufficient clearance between any electronic components of the flight controller and the frame. You ideally want like a millimeter of clearance, because things are going to move slightly in impacts. There's a little bit of give in the gummy, see, so it can move slightly. If it is like a half a millimeter or a quarter millimeter of clearance, it may touch. And when electric components touch conductive metal, sometimes bad things happen. So just make sure you've got enough clearance there. And if you need to, you could add some of these little nuts as spacers perhaps, or use longer screws, or there may be a situation where you need to figure it out if your flight controller doesn't fit like this one does. Next, we're going to solder on the main battery lead, and we are going to be going with the XT30. The iFlight Beast F7 also comes with an XT60 with great big honkin' battery wires. We don't need that for this little quad. The XT30 is fine. And we're going to start. Always add a little bit of flux first. I am using No Clean liquid electrical flux, and I'm using 6337 leaded solder. If you want links to the solder I'm using, the flux, and so forth, I've got links to those on my website, fpvknowitall.com. There's a link in the video description to the website. It's my ultimate FPV shopping list. I always add a little bit of solder to the leads, even though they come tinned from the factory. Factories tend to use no lead-free solder, and lead-free solder doesn't flow very well. You can also add just a little bit of flux to the leads, and I'm going to add a little bit more flux here since you heard that hissing. Some of the flux burned off while I was soldering that joint or tinning that joint. Flux is the key to good soldering. You can solder well without flux. It's a lot easier to solder well with it. And I'm going to make a note here, minus, plus. You see them? Don't get those backwards. Bad things will happen. Next, we're going to install the motors. The motors come with these screws, these button head M2 screws. Those are for the props. Save those for later. And they come with these cap head M2 screws, which are for the motor base. And we're going to mount these motors here at the end of the arm using these two mounting holes that go along the length of the arm, not these two sort of diagonal ones. That would be for a different style of motor mount. If you're not using the Aerolite motors, you may need to use these two like diagonal ones, depending on what orientation the motor's base is. And you want the wires to be going back towards the center, not coming out the end. I've mounted this motor backwards. Oops. By the way, since there are only two screws here, you might consider using like blue Loctite on them. I am currently out of Loctite, so I will not be doing that, but it probably would be a good idea. M2 screws, I mean M3 screws, you like wrench on them till they get tight enough that they probably won't back out, probably. But M2 screws, you'll twist the head off if you tighten them or strip them out if you tighten them down too far. So it would be a really good idea to use Loctite on these. Do as I say, not as I do, kids. Now that the motors are installed, I'm going to solder up the motor wires, but before I do that, I'm just going to dress the motor wires, neatly hold them in place by putting a zip tie on the arm. That's how Tommy does it. And that will help make sure that we cut them to the right length when we cut them. Okay. That zip tie was not the strongest zip tie in the world. And then we are going to route the motor wires to the motor pads. The motor output pads on the Beast are here, these three large thick pads, and there's 3 motor wires going to go to each one. I want to leave just a little bit of slack to give me room to work. You can always cut a wire shorter, but you can never, not easily lengthen it after you cut it short. But let's just snip them off. And I'm going to save these wires because I may have a use for them later on. So I'm just giving myself a little slack and then cutting it just a little bit long of the pads. Next I'm going to strip. Oh, how nice is that? Strip all 3 at once, separate, and twist them so there's no spare strands. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make in their soldering is leaving too much bare wire. So you want to snip it back until there is essentially the length or size of one of the pads that you're going to be soldering to. Maybe a little more, but not much more. On flight controllers, that's typically about 1 to 2 millimeters of bare wire after tinning. The order that you do these doesn't matter. The order that you solder them up will change what direction the motor spins, but you can change it in software afterwards. So the simplest thing to do is just wire the wires straight through. Just lay them flat on the arm and then go 1, 2, 3 to the motor pads. That just keeps the wiring looking neat. That's really all there is to it. Well, all right, now that the motors are installed and soldered up, the next thing to do is the video transmitter. And I immediately see a problem that I have not accounted for. The SharkByte video transmitter is 25 millimeter in size. It will mount on top of this flight controller. Now, it does look like there's enough room there to fit the additional board in. No, not unless it's going to be pretty tight. I think I'm going to need to use the larger standoffs on this guy. That's a shame. Got to pull this whole freaking thing apart. The arms are going to go on the underside of the main plate. The short screws, the 8 millimeter screws, are going to go down through the main plate. Okay. Make sure that the USB port is in the back right. We're going to get this leg, this arm, leg, arm. That's too bad because these screws are not going to be accessible. Oh, that sucks. That's not acceptable. So here's what I've just realized. If you do the tall standoff option the way that Tommy says to, then when you finish installing your flight controller, it is going to cover up these screws and you won't be able to get at them. Which means if you need to change an arm, you can't just pull a screw out and change an arm. You would have to, I guess what you would have to do is take 2 of the motors off, open up the quad, flip the whole flight control stack over, and take out the arm that you want. It's a shame because if you just had taller standoffs, you could build it the normal way and just raise the top. No, you couldn't because the camera plates wouldn't fit. That's a shame. This is the only way, and I checked with Tommy on this, this is basically the only way to do a too high stack. Everything else squeezes stuff in too tight. So because I am choosing to use a too high stack, I'm going to have to do it this way, but it is far from ideal. This is the front right arm. It's going to go in there. This is going to flip out of the way, and the 8 millimeter screw is going to go in the innermost position into the X plate captive nut. loosely. So here's what we've got. Looking down from the top, the inner screws are going down, the outer screws are coming up, and these will take a standoff when we're done. Now the question is, how are we going to mount the flight controller? And it does look like we will need the spacers to keep the flight controller from touching the screw heads. You never want anything electrical touching anything conductive. And that means that we are not going to be able to fit the flight controller and the VTX on the screws that come with the kit. We're going to need some longer screws. M3, M2. Yes. Got some M2. I'll put a link to this screw assortment down in the video description, since you'll probably need it. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's at least 1 millimeter of clearance. It's always something. There's always some problem to solve in a build that you didn't expect. You work your way through. Frankly, I consider these screw heads to be inaccessible, to be just a total deal breaker on this build. If I had known that that was going to happen, I wouldn't have proceeded. And I don't encourage you to follow along, because having to take the whole damn thing apart in order to change an arm, arms are going to break, especially on this build, on a build like this. To have to disassemble the whole damn thing to get at that screw and take the arm out is a total deal breaker. So this is just not viable. I'm going to continue because now I'm this far in and I kind of want to see it through. I'm going to go ahead and just give this a couple more little, I'm going to tuck it up in there. Yeah, there we go. Get that, keep that from hanging out where it's going to kind of get in the way. Oh, that's very nice. The next thing to do is going to be to wire up the receiver. I do have a full tutorial video on how to install, flash, and set up this exact Express LRS receiver. So I'm not going to go into all the details here, but I will show you me wiring it up. Like, I know the order for this one is ground 5 volts TX RX, but I don't know off the top of my head which side is up. Right? So, yeah, so here's a rule of thumb. These two little ground pads here, these two little pads here are next to the ground, and that, okay, maybe I'll remember that next time, but I always double check the pin out. That's honestly a little too much solder. You see how it's kind of bulbing out? It's more than I should really have. I just like to add fresh solder because the flux in the solder helps the joint work well, although I'm also adding flux, so overkill. I reckon this is just, I mean, the SharkByte VTX is going to go on top, and that's basically it. So I reckon this is just going to go in the back of the quad somehow. Where is it going to wire on the flight controller? Looks like UART 7 is the best place to put it. There's UART 3 over here on the edge, but that kind of doesn't look like the greatest place. So we're going to use UART 7, I guess. That's better. I'm going to make sure I cover up the soldered pads so I don't risk any electronics touching the carbon. Carbon is conductive, and if electronics touch carbon, the fire can come out. Try not to damage that antenna while pushing down on it. The next thing I got to do is install this capacitor. In case you don't know, capacitors help filter high voltage spikes out of the electrical system, and quadcopters have incredibly noisy electrical systems because the motors, the ESCs, it all just makes a lot of electrical noise. Capacitors are often thought to be optional on 4S builds. This is going to be a 6S build. The higher voltage means higher voltage spikes, and they are just absolutely mandatory on 6S builds. But they are, frankly, very, very useful on 4S builds too, and you really ought to be using them. SharkByte says that you need a capacitor. In fact, they include a capacitor with the SharkByte VTX to help protect it from voltage spikes. You really want a capacitor. You also could use a thing called a spike absorber from FetTech, which is it basically helps the capacitor to do its job even better. I'm not going to be installing one of those on these builds, but I will put a link in the video description to one if you want to add it to your build. And normally, what I would do with a capacitor is mount it directly to the ESC. But in this case, that's clearly not going to work. There's just not enough room for it. The next thing that people do is they'll mount the capacitor on the XT60 or the XT30. They'll just basically put it there, maybe with a little heat shrink around it. And that significantly reduces the effectiveness of the capacitor. The further the capacitor is from the source of noise, which is the ESC, the worse it's going to perform. The compromise that I think I'm going to make in this case is to mount the capacitor with some wires. In fact, what I like to do is use the motor wires, which they're usually 18 or 20 gauge, and as long as we keep them just as short as we can reasonably keep them, then we'll be okay. We'll get some protection from our capacitor. Maybe not as much as we might if it was directly mounted, but that's just really not going to work, is it? So I think in order to figure out the best place to put the capacitor, first I am going to mount the camera, and then I'll know how much room I have to mount the capacitor, where my options are. And Ummagawd includes these nice little countersunk screws to mount your camera, and they will fit into these nice little countersunk holes here in the camera plate. But because we're using this adapter to adapt to the micro-sized camera, or the nano-sized camera, 14 millimeters wide to a 19 millimeter mounting, that will not work. So we're going to have to use the stock screws that come with the camera. That's okay. And they come in two different lengths. So let's just see which length is going to work best for us. Is that going to go in? No, that's not going to go in. We need the longer ones. You never want to use too long of a mounting screw for your camera because it can screw into the camera and damage the circuit board. I'm just going to leave those loose for now. So I think I can pretty clearly see that there is nowhere like behind the camera that I could mount the capacitor. There's no carbon there to really mount it. So I'm going to have to mount it back here, which is unfortunate. That's longer than I'd like the wires to be. In fact, that's basically the length of the battery lead. I still think it's better than mounting the capacitor on the battery lead, because handling the battery lead, plugging and unplugging batteries, can damage the capacitor. So I'm still going to do it, but I'm a little disappointed. Do I have a, I could try to use thicker wire. Oh, well, that's oh, yes, oh yes, oh, can I sneak it? Oh. So I don't want to do that because it would be touching the flight controller. It would transmit vibration from the frame to the flight controller. That's no good, but I can put it here. I can put it here, and that gets it just a little closer and a little more securely mounted. Yes, I will not get in the way of the, yes, I think that's a decent plan. Alrighty, so on a capacitor there's a positive and a negative leg. The negative leg is always marked with a white stripe down the side. You know it's the negative leg because it usually also has a negative sign on it. So this is the negative leg, and let's just, okay, the negative leg is not stripped, the positive leg is. The positive leg was stripped. The negative leg wasn't, right? Pretty sure. Not 100% sure. This is why it's better to use like two colored wire, red and black, duh. But I didn't have a convenient length of colored wire, right? So I just didn't bother. Now the challenge here is going to be to solder this down on top of the positive pad without desoldering the battery wire. Oof. Oh, shit. That's what flux does for you, baby. That went from a pile of crap to a beautiful, silver, smooth, shiny flux. Oh, boy. I hope to God that I got the positive and the negative right. No explosion. Yeah, if you reverse bias a capacitor, if you get the positive and negative wrong, it'll go pop. So that didn't happen, so I guess I got it right. Yay, me. Okay, so I just smoke checked it. I do want to plug the camera back in, the video transmitter back in, and just function check everything before I mount the camera. So we're just going to plug it in, and we're going to see that we have image basically from the camera. Yes, we do. Just go ahead and get this camera installed because it is flopping around an awful lot. I cannot find, I don't love the idea of using metal nuts. I guess there's frickin' room. Yeah, they gave enough clearance, but geez, tightening it down is, I have absolutely knocked electric components off a board while tightening down a nut like this with a the forceps. So I'm gonna be like I just knocked a tiny resistor off as I twisted the nut. So I'm gonna try to be super freaking careful and not destroy this $90 video transmitter. This is actually, I'm sorry, this is a $50 video transmitter. So who cares? And that is about as far as I think I'm gonna go in the assembly. At this point, we basically have a quadcopter, and I'm going to take it over to the desk and set it up in Betaflight. The first thing I always like to do when I set up Betaflight is get my receiver working, because then it just feels like I have control of the quad. And we're going to do that in the ports tab. And the ports tab has, I'm not sure if this is the default settings or not, but I have my receiver on UART 7, so I'm going to enable serial RX for UART 7 and save and reboot. And then we're going to go to configuration. This is an Express LRS receiver, and Express LRS uses the Crossfire protocol to talk to the flight controller. So I'm going to save and reboot. And I'm going to power up. I think I've already flashed and bound these guys. Well, it seems like this flight controller doesn't power the receiver from USB. Hold on, I gotta get a battery. Also a little annoying, I don't know if you guys can see this, but a little annoying that that LED is on the underside. They should really put the LED on the same side as the antenna, because everybody's going to mount this receiver with the antenna facing up. But what are you going to do? You can still see it, and it's solid, which indicates it's bound. As I said earlier, I have a whole video on setting up this exact Express LRS receiver, so I'm not going to, you may not even be using Express LRS. I'm going to put a link to that video down in the video description if you need to go through those steps. But for now, the Express LRS receiver is flashed, it's updated, it's bound, it's talking to my controller, and we're going to proceed from there. So then I'm going to go to the Betaflight receiver tab, and I'm going to see if I have motion there, and I do. Fantastic. I haven't messed up my wiring or anything. And I'm going to check my channel mapping, throttle, yaw, pitch, and roll are all moving correctly. And I'm going to check my endpoints, 1000 to 2000, 1000 to 2000, 1000 to 2000, 1000 to 2000. Fantastic. My endpoints are all working correctly as well. If you need to know more about setting up your channel mapping and setting up your endpoints, I have another tutorial I made about that, and I'll link it in the video description below. I am going to change my stick low threshold from 1050 to 1010. That gets rid of a little bit of deadband at the bottom of the throttle. And since my endpoints are set correctly, I can afford to do that. I do not need to set up an RSSI channel. Although ExpressLRS does put LQ and RSSI on aux 11 and aux 12, Betaflight can just read that telemetry directly and put it right in the OSD, so we don't need to do that for ExpressLRS or Crossfire, as the case may be. We'll go ahead and save that. The next thing we're going to do is set up our aux modes. We're going to set angle mode to aux 2 in the middle. I don't use horizon mode. Horizon mode can go die. Beeper on my momentary switch here. And we'll put that over there so the beeper is on when I pull the switch. Turtle mode is going to be there, this switch down. Arming is going to be, that's correct. Turtle mode, angle, beeper. I think that's it. I think that's basically what I usually do. So we'll save that. And we'll just double check, hide unused modes. Angle, turtle, beeper. That's my basic mode setup. Next, let's go to the configuration tab and see what else we can set up. This is an F7 processor, so I'm not sure why we're on 4K PID loop. Let's go to 8K PID loop. I'm going to set the maximum arm angle to 180. That disables the maximum arm angle and lets you arm even if the craft is not perfectly level, like if it's sitting on a hill. I like to have air mode turned on most of my quads. I turn it on by default. Air mode increases low throttle stability. When you drop the throttle all the way down with air mode off, it just kind of goes. With air mode on, it stays stable. It has some negative effects, but I think that on the whole, I like it to be on. I'm going to turn on these Dshot beacon configuration. What that does, this quad doesn't have a buzzer on it. So if I crash it and it's in the grass and I can't find it, what am I going to do? Well, one thing you can do is just enable turtle mode and boop, 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 flip the motors, and you can kind of hear the props moving in the grass. But you can also turn on this option, which causes the motors to beep, just like when you first plug in the battery. All right, we'll save that. Now, I do think we're going to want to use bidirectional Dshot. Does this ESC support bidirectional Dshot by default? Let's find out. By the way, do these motors have 14 poles? I think they do. Oh, phooey. I'm overheating my SharkByte video transmitter. For now, I'm just going to unplug it so it stays powered down. There is a... I'm so glad I put that on a plug. There is a software setting you can do in SharkByte to cause it to stay powered down until you arm the quad. We'll take a look at that a little later. So, is bidirectional Dshot going to work? Well, first, how many poles do the motors have? To answer that question, just count the magnets. Just start like at the logo and turn the motor until you come back around to the logo. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's multiple logos on these stupid motors. There are 3 logos. Okay. So 14 motor poles is correct. It's only usually smaller motors that have less than that. I think we should do reversed motor direction. I think props out is going to make this quad fly better, especially a lightweight quad with motors that lack a little bit of torque. I think that's the way to go. Okay, so we'll save and reboot. Next question, is bidirectional Dshot going to work? I can't remember if this is a BL-Heli32 or a BL-Heli-S ESC. The way to find out is to go into the Motors tab, and yes, we have 100% errors. Damn, that sucks. That probably means the ESC doesn't support bidirectional Dshot. So what we're going to do is we will disconnect, and we'll close this configurator, and let's go get the BlueJay configurator. BlueJay is a firmware that runs on BL-Heli-S ESCs that enables bidirectional Dshot. It also enables ESC music, which BL-Heli-S ESCs usually can't do. You may be thinking of JESC or BL-Heli-M or Jazz Maverick, which are all different firmwares that enable bidirectional Dshot on BL-Heli-S ESCs. They're all fine. JESC you have to pay for. I'm choosing BlueJay because I recently asked on a live stream which of them was the best, and the consensus was that BlueJay, well, JESC is good, but you have to pay for it. It's picked up the flight controller here. We'll connect, and we will read setup. Oh, looking good. So we'll leave all that alone, but what I just want to do is flash all. So let's GH30. So let's do flash all, GH30. Ooh, I can select my PWM frequency. I think for these first 5-inch, we need as much torque as we can get. So I'm going to select the lowest PWM frequency. And then I'm going to hit flash. And it'll flash those ESCs. And hopefully not break anything. I'll go back to Betaflight configurator and yay! Errors 0%. It worked. So now bidirectional Dshot is working. We can do our RPM filtering. Let's just double check. My props are off. We'll check our motor direction next. All right, I got the quad facing away from me. And let's just check our, oh, I did. I rotated the flight controller. I did rotate the flight controller. I'm gonna need to fix that. And the way we do this is we write down motor number 1, 2, 3, 4. We write down the, no, sorry. We write down the slider number. We write down the motor position, and we're going to write down the pin number. Okay, so we're going to raise these sliders one by one. Okay, front left. Slider number 1 is spinning position number 2. Okay, that is spinning out, so that's the correct position. That's the correct direction. Slider number 2 is spinning position number 4. The direction is incorrect. So we need to, let's just put a little R here, meaning we need to reverse that motor. And we'll type resource. We're going to look for these motor numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to write those pins down. Number 1 is BOO. Number 2 is BO1. Number 3 is E09. And number 4 is E11. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these numbers and assign them to these pins as follows. Resource motor 2 BOO, 2 BOO. Resource motor 4 BO1. Resource motor 1 EO9. Resource motor 3 E11. E11, yes. And we'll type save. And now the motor should be mapped correctly. Oh, yay! Woo! All right, positions 1 and 4 were the ones that needed to be reversed. They were positions 2 and 3, but now they're positions 1 and 4 after the remap. Number 1 is going to be reversed, and number 4 is going to be reversed. Right setup. It's now spinning the right way, position 4. It's now spinning the right way. Motors are going the right direction. Yay! Now you may remember that we rotated the flight controller so it did not face forward, and we can verify that by moving the quadcopter in our hands and see that when we tip it forward, it actually the 3D model tips to the left. When we tip it to the side, it actually tips forward. We have rotated it 90 degrees, and what we need to do is go to the configuration tab and change the yaw degrees. I don't even remember. Was it -90 or... I'm just going to try -90. Save and reboot. and I'm going to come back to the setup tab, and I'm going to tip the quadcopter forward, and it tips forward, left, and it tips left, back, and it tips back, right, and it tips right. The 3D model is now moving correctly. We just, I didn't know if it was negative or positive 90, so I just guessed, and it turned out I got it right. So that is solved. We also should go into the setup tab real quick and just lay the quad flat on the table and calibrate accelerometer. Just something we need to get out of the way during every build. Now, if your goal is to get this quadcopter under 250 grams, you may be flying the 360 milliamp hour 6S battery that Ummagawd sells, and that is a high volt battery. If you are going to fly high volt batteries, you need to change this maximum cell voltage, because the default of 4.3, the high volt battery is going to come in at 4.35. So what you're going to want to do is change that from 4.3 to 4.4 if you will be using any high volt batteries. The next thing you might want to do is set up your SharkByte video transmitter. For example, SharkByte has the ability to use Betaflight's canvas mode to draw the full Betaflight OSD, every single part of it, including the menus, but also all of the Betaflight OSD. DJI doesn't do that. I've got a video on how to set up SharkByte, and I'm not going to make you go watch the video. I'm going to put an excerpt from that video here so that we can go through the configuration, because I did it on this very quad. So if you are following along, this is what you need to know. If you want the full start to finish SharkByte setup, including flashing firmware and other stuff that doesn't pertain to this exact build, I'll put a link to that down in the video description. Hey there folks, it's Joshua from the future here. Joshua in the past has the wrong wiring diagram for the flight controller. The wiring diagram he has says that this plug is UART 2, but this plug is actually UART 1. So going forward, when he shows you that wiring diagram and says we're working with UART 2, you should know that we're actually working with UART 1. What we need to type is set OSD underscore display port underscore device equals MSP, and set display port underscore MSP underscore serial equals, and then we're going to take the UART number, which is UART 1, and we're going to subtract 1 from it, because programmers don't like to count from 1, they like to count from 0. So instead, UART number 2 is 1. Programmers, what can you do? So equals 1, and then save. Next, we're going to go to the ports tab, and we're going to go to UART 2, and we're going to enable the configuration /MSP option. But you see, my flight controller already has serial RX on UART 2, and we need to disable that. And if there's anything else in any of these spots, we also need to disable that. If you try to put two things on the same UART, the ports tab it'll actually just reset itself completely, which may not be ideal. And then we're going to go to the configuration tab and make sure that OSD is enabled, and it is. After that, we can go to the OSD tab and we can set up some OSD elements. And in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to set up my standard Betaflight OSD. My standard Betaflight OSD is, here we go, OSD configuration for analog. Let's just go and paste that right the heck in. That's how I set up my OSD on all my quads. I just copy paste the CLI commands that relate to the OSD. It's everything starting with set OSD underscore from your config dump. And then you'll see my OSD is ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to go into the SharkByte menu, and I'm going to change the low power mode to on, and the pit mode to pit 1 milliwatt. And can I set the power? No, those are my only two options. Okay, we're going to save that, and that should put us in 1 milliwatt mode when we are not armed. Now you're going to see some speckles start appearing on the screen because that 1 milliwatt, that's going to help keep it from overheating. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to try to enter camera control mode using the Betaflight keystroke. That is normally how you configure a SharkByte camera, especially when the camera doesn't have a joystick. And you do that by centering the throttle and yawing right. And I think it worked because you see the OSD disappeared. So now I'm going to center throttle yaw right. Yeah. Now I'm in the camera menu. So center throttle yaw right is like clicking the button. And then let's see, camera ID on. I'm going to click once. Yes. So what I want to do is return, and if I just, okay, so then this joystick is like clicking the camera joystick up, down, left, right. Day, night, auto, I guess that's fine. Picture adjust, we can tweak the picture. I'm going to leave it on the defaults for now. Nick Burns has a video about this camera where he makes some suggestions, but we're going to leave this alone for now. So now that the camera ID is off, that's all I wanted to do, and we will exit and we will save all. And now we are out of the menu, but we're still in camera control mode, so the OSD is not back. To exit camera control mode, we're going to center throttle and yaw left. After a second, there we go. Perfect. Well, then the only thing left to do, I guess, is to put my rates in. Boom. We'll do that by just pasting them into the CLI. What about PID tuning? The flight that you saw at the beginning of this video was on default PIDs, because I knew Ummagawd had PIDs for this, and I thought, well, he hadn't sent them to me yet. So it was going to fly fine. I thought it was flying pretty well, but maybe it could fly even better, and certainly you would like to try it out on Tommy's actual PIDs. So this is a CLI dump. I'm going to put a link to this down in the video description, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and go into the CLI and paste, and we'll type save, and then I'm going to go give this a test flight and just make sure it doesn't blow up. For what it's worth, folks, Tommy says this tune may be a little bit too aggressive for 6S biblade. I did go out and test fly it, and it was fine on mine, but it may not be fine on yours, especially if you have beat up props or beat up motors. If that does happen, just take the PD gain slider down a couple clicks and it should bring it under control. Alrighty, I think we're ready to button it up. One of the outstanding things I need to do is actually get a proper antenna. This throwaway antenna is not gonna, I wouldn't use that for, it's not gonna give us the kind of range we would really want. Oh, that's good. That's good. I like that. Luminaire Axi Micro, right hand polarized, UFL, perfect. I don't know how I'm gonna mount it, because the 2Fiddy is really designed for use with DJI. Well, just don't crash, right? Just don't crash. It'll be fine. So, I'm not sure about this antenna. I mean, I'm tempted to just like zip tie it here, right? But if it gets tugged, it's going to rip this UFL off, and that is not acceptable. I really wish I had a proper antenna mount, but I don't. I don't know. So here's what we're going to do. Zoop. Oh my god. Oh my god. What is he doing? He's not going to do what I think he's going to do, is he? What? Can't do that. This beautiful build. Just tape the antenna to the top plate? Are you kidding me? You can't do that. No, listen. Listen. It's going to hold the antenna. It's going to take a little bit of tugging. The antenna will still hang out the back. That's what we're going with, guys. That's what we're going with. That is far from perfect. It's not stressing the UFL. It's not trying to unplug the UFL. And it's going to take a little bit of tugging, and we'll take a little, see, you can pull on it just a little bit, whereas a zip tie would just whoosh, slide right out and tug on that UFL. We don't want that. So for now, that's just what we're going to do. Fabric tape! I'm sorry I've betrayed you. Red electrical tape. We'll have some private time after this build is over. Okay, so to mount the camera, you basically just slide the side plate in here and kind of, there we go. That notch will set down in the bottom plate. Just not, oh. And then The top plate goes on next. The top plate goes on next. It does not seem to have a top or a bottom, so it doesn't matter which way up we put it. And we will start putting these screws in the top plate. And these are the little, I think they're 6mm. The camera is still loose at this point. Next is these retention plates, which help hold the top and bottom plates from sliding up or down, and they're gonna slide on like so, and then we're gonna put a standoff in that's gonna hold them together. Always add retention to your XT60 or XT30 lead, to your battery lead. Always add some retention, like a zip tie that will hold and take the stress if the battery ejects, so you don't rip the pads off your expensive flight controller. So we got just a little slack there, but then however it moves, it's not going to pull on the flight controller. It's biting into that silicone just a little bit. Ummagawd includes some Ummagrip, the best battery pad. Keep your battery from sliding around. And it's a little too wide for this waist right here, so I don't know what the deal is there. So I think I'm gonna just cut a little bit off to make a narrower strip. And it is freaking impossible to separate this backing paper. At least I find it very difficult. So what I like to do is just pinch with a, there you go, see, it comes right off. Try to center that up. Perfect. Perfecto. Is that it? Is that it? Are we done? We gotta put the props on, but we're using these 2-blade HQ props. They are T5x3, T5x3, and I even have Tommy's very own white Ummagawd battery straps. Ooh, she look good. She look good, boys. There's only one more thing to do. This is 160 grams. This is the 380 milliamp hour 6S that Tommy sells. It is actually not his favorite way to build this out. His favorite way to build this out is over 250 grams, but we're going to try to stay under 250 for this build. That brings us to 222 grams. We are well under 250. We'll put the props on here. We'll come in at 230, and we're missing the M2 screws for the props, but we are gonna, this is well under 250. Yikes. And a big part of that is SharkByte, because how much does a Vista weigh? If only I had one. A full-fledged Vista here, 32 grams. Well, it's not got the same antenna, it's got a SMA, but yeah, that SharkByte comes, I mean, we've probably saved 15 grams, I would guess. Sweet. Well, folks, that's going to bring us to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed coming along with me on this experience. This is not exactly how Tommy Tabahia builds his 2Fiddy. I reviewed a 2Fiddy built the way he builds it. It was freaking amazing. There's a link in the video description if you want to check it out. I'm super excited to have a SharkByte quad back in my stable, even if this build was a little bit janky, and I'm super excited to take this out and fly it. And I hope you enjoyed coming along with all the turmoil and pitfalls of this experience. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. That's going to do it. I'm going to bed. Happy flying, you guys. What are you still doing here? The video's over. Do you watch all the videos all the way to the end? Wow. You are a super fan. Thank you. That actually helps the channel a lot when you watch the videos all the way to the end. YouTube loves that. You know what else YouTube loves? When you subscribe. Or when you join my Patreon for as little as $2 a month or more if you feel like I've earned. Actually, YouTube doesn't like you to join my Patreon. They don't get a cut of that.